In this video, we're wrapping up our study of Luke chapter 7 and the beginning of chapter 8. We're looking at the woman who anoints Jesus' feet in the home of the Pharisee while they're reclined at the table, this group of women who are also with Jesus, and coming back just to talk about some reflections. What do we do with this story? What does this story mean? What can we take away from it personally as we read and study the passage? I think one of the first things to say is that Jesus in this story exposes the danger of our self-evaluations. I mean, that is really at the heart of the comparison of this Pharisee and this sinful woman. That the Pharisee has not evaluated himself needing anything from Jesus, but he evaluates himself as one who is there to judge Jesus. He sees himself in a position of deciding. I think this often happens when I have conversations with people who are thinking about Christianity. One of the things that we often sort of like to tell ourselves is that we're sort of determining the facts, right? We're studying and investigating. And there's benefit to that. I think people certainly did that with Jesus too. They heard about him and they came to see, to watch, to understand. But if you imagine that you can come to Jesus simply by discerning that it is true, that you could sort of invite Jesus in for dinner, listen, fair-mindedly to what he has to say, and then decide at the end if it's true or not, I'm not convinced that that's enough to really move, to change our hearts. That's where this Pharisee is. He has an idea about what's happening in the world. He's willing to listen to Jesus. He even invites him into his home. He's trying to discern the facts. But in the end, he doesn't truly understand Jesus. The person who understands Jesus is somebody who understands their own desperate condition, who understands their position of need, who understands that this world cannot deliver them or save them from the problems that are within themselves. I'm willing to have a conversation with anybody who wants to talk about the truth of the Bible, who wants to talk about the historical accuracy of Jesus that is portrayed in the Gospels, that wants to understand Christian theology and its implications for life today. Those conversations matter. They're a big part of people understanding who Jesus is. But I don't think that knowledge about Jesus is enough to save. And I do worry about this in the time we live in. I mean, we watch YouTube videos, we listen to apologetics debates, we have ideas about the helpful values of Christianity and stabilizing the Western world. Those things are important. But at the heart of what Luke is saying, Luke is trying to help us see that you will never really understand Jesus until you understand your own brokenness. Until you can say, like Peter does, who throws himself before the feet of Jesus saying, "Depart, I'm not worthy, I'm a sinner." Or this woman who is just overcome with worship and devotion because she knows that she is a sinner, and yet Jesus is welcoming her and receiving from her. Until you have to know about Jesus. I understand that. There's a place for that, apologetics to know Jesus. But until you have this kind of personal experience in which your own sins are brought by faith to Jesus, that's the key line in this passage. Your faith has saved you, Jesus said. It's not just your knowledge. It's not just your decision to follow me, but out of sin, bringing your brokenness by faith, trusting it into the hands of Jesus. Until you have that personal experience, you may know about Jesus, but you've not really understood what Jesus is offering. You've not really seen and perceived who Jesus is. And you may be following the teachings of Jesus, you may be following the Christian theology, but you're not truly a disciple of Jesus until you have come in your brokenness, in your need to him. And so I think part of what this story is about is one of the keys is what we say to ourselves. At the heart of this story is Jesus perceiving what a Pharisee is saying to himself. The Pharisee said to himself, if Jesus knew, if he were a true prophet and knew who this woman was, he would never allow this woman to be doing this act. So in other words, the inner dialogue that we say to ourselves, not what we always say publicly, not what we always say we believe, not what we're sort of described to others, but what we say in our hearts to ourselves is the real thing, the truest thing about what we actually believe. So I think you should pay attention to that inner monologue. What do you say about yourself? Do you find yourself thinking generally you're better than most people? Do you think that you perceive and understand things while other people don't? Do you, and I think this happens a lot too, right? Do we prejudge the Bible? Do we think Jesus always agrees with us? Jesus is always on our side. Jesus agrees with our sense of right and wrong and morality. Or when we encounter Jesus in the Bible, do we find ourselves challenged? Are we willing to actually listen, to quiet the dialogue we tell ourselves, to acknowledge that we are in need of something we don't possess? And can we actually listen to what Jesus is saying? Or is Jesus always sort of parroting what we would say? Because this inner dialogue is often in the way of actually hearing and perceiving what Jesus is saying. This is important for Luke because I think he just continues to build this theme. We've talked a lot about being in a position of need. And in many ways, Luke has made that explicit. People come paralyzed. People come filled with evil spirits. People come in broken health conditions. I mean, Luke likes to use these healing stories because they make need visible. We can see people in that position of need. But those aren't the only forms of need Luke is interested in. And he's using them as examples to help us ask in this inner dialogue, am I coming to Jesus recognizing my own need? And that ability to do that inner need, is at the heart of what Luke is trying to show us in his gospel. And you see that if you go back in Luke chapter 6 to the opening of Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. It's more commonly known in Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. But here we have it, the Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6. And so compare the two things that Luke compares. Blessed are you who are poor, for God's kingdom is yours. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, and when they exclude you and mock you and throw out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. I mean, that's what happens in this passage, by the way, right? So this woman is a sinner, he says to himself. He's literally throwing her out, her name being evil. Rejoice in that day and keep for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for their fathers did the same thing to the prophets. Now, what is he getting at? Is it true that it is good? Eugene Peterson, in his translation of the Beatitudes, tried to use the word lucky. Lucky are you when you're poor. Lucky are you when you hunger, right? Is that what Jesus is getting at here? Blessed are you to be actually financially poor? No, I think we understand that there's more going on here. In Matthew's gospel, it's blessed are you when you are poor in spirit. Luke simplifies that because he, again, is trying to use these concrete examples of actual need. But what he's driving at here is that in recognizing our own poverty, in recognizing our own hunger, again in Matthew it's hunger and thirst for righteousness, for recognizing we're weeping, actual mourning, that we are in a position to receive, that the kingdom is yours, that you will be filled, that you will laugh. And so he draws this comparison to those who have these things, which I want you to compare here, the sinful woman we just looked at, who obviously is hungry, who obviously is literally weeping, who obviously is poor, at least socially, and who is thrown out, her name being evil. And yet, isn't it true that hers is the kingdom, and that she goes away filled, and that she has the last laugh, and that like the prophets, Jesus is criticized for being a false prophet in the very story, that she actually will have this great reward. Now compare the Pharisee to this other list. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe when men speak well of you, for their fathers did the same thing to the false prophets. Well, I mean, here's this Pharisee who he may not have been financially rich, but he's certainly rich within the community. He stands in a position of authority. He certainly is full now. Ironically, they're eating in his home at a banquet. He has the sort of laugh now as he's dismissing this woman, and people certainly speak well of him. They're coming into his home. Jesus is supposed to be honored to be in his home for a meal. But at the end of the story, isn't he the one that misses out? Isn't he the one who has already received his consolation? Isn't he the one who eventually goes hungry, is not given this salvation? Won't he be the one to mourn and weep, to realize one day that Jesus was in his very home and yet still he did not believe? And isn't he like he claims that Jesus is a false prophet. Isn't he himself like one of the false prophets that can't recognize a true prophet? These things in Luke's gospel are not about just actual sickness, actual poverty, actual starvation. They are about those things. But Luke is trying to say, in those examples, see yourself, see your own needs, see your own sin. Because if you do not see it, then be sure that you've already counted yourself as rich. You've already counted yourself as full. You've already counted yourself as laughing, as having the joy and happiness, and you'll miss out on the thing that Jesus is offering. I want to give you a personal story real quick. Not long ago, I got invited to speak at a men's breakfast, and it was for a church that they do a lot of work in the community, particularly reaching out to criminals who are been released from jail or from drug addicts. That they work with really sort of broken individuals. And I got asked to come speak to this men's group. And so I showed up, and as I was sitting between two men, one of them was like a massive human being. I mean, he had to be at least 6'5", 6'6", just, fit as could be, just kind of a massive, intimidating man. Both of them covered in tattoos, face tattoos, arm tattoos. And I began talking to one of the gentlemen and asking him about himself. He was asking about me. I was explaining I'm a pastor. And they got to the beginning, and one of the things they did after we had this conversation is they let guys stand up and share a short 30-second testimony about progress they had made that week. And so this man stands up beside me, and he says, I just want to celebrate with you that it's been 30 days since I've been in my last physical altercation. That he had gone 30 days without getting in a physical fight. I'm sitting next to this man that just is sort of towering over me at this moment. It would be very easy for somebody to look at the two of us. And by the way, let me point out, I know way more about the Herodian dynasty and the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Mishnah and the Talmud, and I do lectures on YouTube about the Bible. It would be very easy for me to see his need, to recognize his need. Here's a man who's trying to follow Jesus, and his achievement is 30 days without fighting someone else. And to look at him and see his need, but by seeing his need, to begin to not see my own. And part of what struck me, and I found myself very moved in that moment, because I thought, there is a risk that he is actually a better follower of Christ than me. That I may, like that Pharisee, be able to talk to Jesus, to learn about Jesus, to evaluate, even teach about Jesus, to understand the theology of Jesus. But there is something in his brokenness, something in the humility of his brokenness, that might actually make him a better follower of Jesus. That because of his need, there is a kind of faith in his ability to see what Jesus is offering that he does need, that may actually make him closer to Jesus. I ended up thinking about this very little parable that Jesus offers in that story where he says, 2 debtors are forgiven, one 500 denarii and the other 50. I mean, is this not me and him, right? Released from jail, off drugs, finally cleaning up his life, devoting himself to Jesus. Other men in the room shared about how they're re-engaging in their children's life after they've been, estranged, about how they're off drug addiction. They have been forgiven so much that it's actually easier for them to worship and to follow Jesus than I, who can look at my life generally and say, well, I've never done anything too bad. This is what Luke is trying to help us see in this story, that the greatest danger is not those who are full of sin. This is the Pharisaic mindset, right? That those like the Pharisees who are keeping the traditions, they are the ones who have God's blessing. And it's those who are far from God, those sinners in the community that are risking God's blessing. And Jesus, and through Luke's gospel, is flipping this, saying, those who are the greatest sinners, if they can recognize their sin, and if they can come to Jesus out of that need, are closer to the kingdom of God, are closer to being able to receive from him. And those of us who look at our lives and say, well, I'm mostly a good person, right? Those who imagine ourselves generally better than everybody else in the culture and society. And hey, I'm interested in spiritual things. I'm interested in learning the Bible. I'm interested in evaluating Jesus and how he says to live. That even out of that interest, if it's not coming from a posture of need, we actually, like the Beatitudes, may be furthest from the kingdom. So these stories, they challenge the way that we talk to ourselves and think about ourselves. And they challenge us to step aside and say, do I actually recognize my need for Jesus? I hope there's some people watching these videos that perhaps are in that state of evaluating Christianity, trying to think about what Jesus is teaching. And I would just say to you, keep doing that. I believe in that. That's why I'm making these videos. But it's not just knowledge about the Bible that makes you a follower of Christ. At some point, you have to see your own sinful condition, your own need. You have to recognize that in order to come to Christ, by faith and need, you bring your brokenness to him. And it's only then in that moment that you really begin to understand who Jesus is, that you really find the kingdom open, that you find yourself finally filled from the hunger you have. You have to be hungry before you can be filled. And if you're not hungry, if you find yourself in a posture constantly of evaluating and judging, you'll never taste and see that the Lord is good, which is the promise of Scripture. This is a theme that Luke's going to continue on. We're nearing the end of his Galilean ministry, and I think the conversation is going to shift In the beginning of Luke's gospel, it's primarily about how do you recognize Jesus. The conversation is going to become how do you follow Jesus, as Jesus is going to begin to dialogue more with his disciples, his apostles. But we cannot get past this opening of Luke without hearing and taking seriously this point, that unless you see yourself in a position of need, you'll never actually hear and understand what it is Jesus is offering to you. I hope you'll hear that. I hope you take that seriously, reread the story and consider, and maybe find your own personal takeaway from it as well. And I'm looking forward to the videos we have coming. I think there's more of this to dig into, and hopefully more that by the Holy Spirit, both Jesus and the text is trying to speak into your life like mine. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and leave me a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions you have about this passage, and we'll be back in the next passage in the next video.